Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the LNUR line podcast for LEGO train fans. We're talking about custom LEGO power systems for train today. But first we'll introduce some members before I forget. So I am Richard, chair of LNUR. We've got Matt.
Evening.
He's our podcast producer. We have Andrew, our podcast runner.
Hello.
We also have members Henry.
Hello.
Dan.
Hello.
Luke.
Hello.
And Will.
Hello.
We have new member Tim sort of listening in the audience at the moment, so I'm sure he might chip in in the chat later on for us. So we're going to move on to some LEGO news first, LEGO train news for May 2021. The first bit of news we've got is that the LEGO Gauge modular system, or LGMS, are fundraising towards a domain, lgms.org, to host a website with presumably documentation of their standards and things. There has been a bit of discussion in the community about whether $1,600 plus sales tax and agent fees for the sale of the domain is worth it. But I think if it helps to establish LEGO train hobby in the wider model railway hobby a little bit more, I think that's probably a good thing, and I've chipped in a little bit. Okay, there's also a LEGO Ideas Roundup, and there's a couple of train related sets in there, so Andrew's going to talk us through those.
Yeah, so this is the first review period for 2021, and a ridiculous 57 projects have reached the 10,000 supporters spot, which means you're pretty unlikely that any of them, any individual one, is actually going to get made into a set, because there's just so many. But out of the 57, there are 4 train-related sets at least. The first one is the Polar Express, and I believe someone said that a previous Polar Express idea has already reached the 10,000 mark and wasn't selected. And there's quite a lot of Polar Express ideas out there, so it'll be interesting to see how this one fares. Next up, bit of a slightly different one. Someone's designed some train bookends to go on a shelf. Even though they're not kind of your traditional train set, I think they're quite a nice design.
I would probably buy those if they got made into a set. I think they're quite nice, and they maybe have a bit more appeal than just another train set on LEGO Ideas. They're a bit more creative, maybe.
Yeah, I think they've certainly got that going for them. So there we go. Thirdly, there's a Canadian train set. It's the VIA Rail Canada. It's a locomotive and some carriages. It looks quite nicely put together. And finally, there's a model of the 4th rail bridge. It's a kind of micro scale, and you're kind of talking trains about 1 stud wide in scale type thing. It's basically just a bridge on a blue base plate, and that's it. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how any of those fare, if at all. But we'll have to wait and see.
I'm not holding my breath for any of those, probably. Okay, we'll move on to Henry, who is going to talk to us about the schedule that FX Bricks have announced for future products.
Okay, so this was posted on their website on the 4th of May. So that'll date the video whenever it's released. But they've mentioned that the track that they've started pre-sailing is in full production, and they're expecting to soon receive the products and then ship them out, hopefully. And then the next product releases are the Straight 8, 32, the R72, and a R88 curves. And they're intending to start pre-sale on the 1st of June. And the inventory is expected to arrive July or early August for both their European distributor, JB Spielbahn, and their American distributor. And then they have released a nice schedule of when they're planning to release the other bits. And after those 4 items, they're hoping to release the R56 and R104 curves, which they're hoping will be start pre-sales in August and delivered by the end of 2020. With the P40 Switch, they're currently working on it, and they're hoping that deliveries will start at the end of 2021 or in the first quarter of 2022. and they've just given an update on the motor buggy and other electrical accessories that they're still in design and they know it's important. And
Is
they've
there
temporarily closed their store until the 1st of June to improve it.
So there's no definite date for the motors, which I think, as nice as the track is, I'm not sure I'd be willing to commit to the cost of the 9-volt track until they do have a system for the motors.
Correct.
Probably.
They have just said they're working on it and they want it to be very good.
Okay, well, yep, that's fair enough, and hopefully it will be. I'm sure it will be, because everything else they've done seems to be decent.
For all you 9-volters out there.
I say I have received some of their track and it is top notch. So if you've already got 9-volt, it's definitely worth it.
Is that the sample pack?
Yep, it's beautiful.
Oh, you got that? Awesome. Cool. Okay, thanks. The last bit of news we have, we thought we'd let our very own Spammy McSpammerson little slot. He's got some really nice models coming up. So Will's going to talk about Block Junction and British Bricks collaboration, and Pierce Bricks as well, I guess.
I am knee deep in collaborations at the moment. Barely anything I've designed is going to go out in ages, but we have. By the time this podcast is released, we shall have hopefully released Trace's ever popular Terrier, British Bricks' USA tank, and some civil engineering wagons by Pete Neumann. So we've got a lot of excellent contributed stuff, and a little sneak peek. The next British Bricks locomotive will be everybody's favourite 060 tank engine, the E2, otherwise known as Thomas the Tank Engine. Although whether I'll do a blue version or not, I haven't decided yet.
Fair enough. Thanks, Will. And actually, we can hand back over to you because you're going to run us through your pick of Lego ideas and trains on Lego ideas.
Yep. Now I'm going to peddle somebody else's designs. So, our first one today is a nice, I would say, city-adjacent set named simply Train Station. It consists of a level crossing, a slightly improved footbridge to the kind we're used to at the city sets, a station building, 2 platforms, and a canopy.
Yeah,
and
it's nice.
It's very nice. It's Europe, according to the description. It's based on German or Swiss architecture. But as we were discussing before we started the podcast, it would you could get away with that in America, Europe, with a little bit of modification. You get away with it in the UK, and it's a nice little set that wouldn't cost too much and would improve your railway. And he's done something most Lego sets don't do, and given it proper platforms, 1 platform per track. That is designed by somebody called Red Chips. It has 131 supporters and 414 days left. The next one is the New Orleans Streetcar number 965. This is a rather fine green tram with red windows and red doors, with a plinth in a similar style to the Crocodile, plus a shelter and some minifigs for waiting for the tram. It includes a string-operated door opening doors. It has steps that fold down from the doors, although you have to do that by hand. According to the description, it has the option to add a motor, although I'd be interested to see how he does that. But it is very smart. Obviously, a bit of love and attention to detail done on that one, and it's got a nice little bit of a scenic addition, scenic shelter as well, which is quite nice. That is designed by Captain_Morris22. Has 246 supporters and 344 days left. The next one is very much a Lego City set, but it's done that thing I like with Lego City sets, where they've not made it complicated, but they've captured it well. And it's the Glacier Express, based on the Swiss train the Swiss train with the panoramic coaches that travels around the Alps. Consists of 4 coaches, 3 of them white panoramic ones, and one of them, I assume, is a buffet car or something like that. Plus a streamlined fronted double-ended electric locomotive. Couldn't find out whether it was powered or not. It doesn't look powered. In fact, it's got some interior engine details, so it's probably not powered. but it's very nice city scale, very much 6 wide city scale design that would look good on any layout, and as the guy says, would look quite nice on display as well. That is designed by 2x3_tile. Has 379 supporters and 338 days left. The next one is another city scale set known as Shunting Locomotive. Not a particularly inspiring title. It's a little yellow shunter which is powered by Powered Up, plus two open wagons. Again, like the last one, it's not super complicated, but it's a little bit nicer than certainly the loco is a little bit nicer than you'd get from a normal city set. Nice compact shunting loco design, and we haven't had one of those since 9 volt. Since 9 volt. So it'd be nice to see a set like that. So the yellow is little. It's quite similar to a tram loco actually. It's got paneling down the sides to hide the wheels. Your little yellow diesel shunter and 2 brown trucks. It is designed by Honza 256. Has 238 supporters and 337 days left. Finally, I think the nicest one I've seen recently, Steam Locomotive Enkhuizen. I apologise to anybody from the Netherlands for that pronunciation. It's a little locomotive from the Netherlands. Apparently it's an industrial locomotive. Blue loco with a little bit of red lining. It is, by the looks of it, power functions powered, which that would be upgraded to Powered Up, which would probably improve it actually, because there's a little bit of, you can just about see where the plug is on the top of the battery box, which is a shame. But otherwise, it is very nicely detailed locomotive. Again, a little shunting loco. More in line with the Crocodile and City, this one. I think it's at the cylinders, it looks like it's about 8 or 9 wide, 7 wide elsewhere. It's got a lot of details. Clearly somebody who's based it on a real loco that they love a lot. Working cylinders, which is always nice. And yeah, it's just a very smart little locomotive. That is designed by the Brick Train Builder. At the moment, only has 64 supporters and only has 55 days left. So if anybody supports any of these, could they please support that one? Yeah, and that's my roundup for this month.
Great, thank you, Will. I think some good choices there. I really like the yellow diesel shunter, actually, although I think the wagons could do with a bit more variation. And the blue engines, nice enough. Is it blue or dark blue? I can't
Dark
quite
blue.
tell. Oh, even better. Yeah, I'm sold. I'd buy that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that was normal blue, I think that'd be much more vibrant.
Yeah, normal blue doesn't. I mean, I've used them for some of my more city-esque locomotives, but it doesn't really shoot steam engines. It's too clean and cartoony.
Yeah, I think dark blue's a lot nicer, isn't it? Okay, we can move on to the topic of the podcast, which is train control systems. So an earlier podcast, and someone might be able to remind me which one, we covered power systems for Lego trains. What we didn't cover very well, we didn't think, was the availability and capabilities of various sort of third-party power systems, custom power systems for Lego trains, or custom power systems which can be adapted for Lego trains. So we thought we'd cover that in the podcast. Firstly, we're going to look at the capability of the existing systems. So we're going to start. We're going to go modern to old. So we're going to start with Powered Up, and Henry is going to cover sort of capabilities and what Powered Up is capable of in terms of Lego trains.
Okay, so Powered Up is the most recent version. The first train sets were released in 2018, and what you have is you have a battery box which takes AAA batteries, which also acts as the receiver. You then have a controller for which you can substitute a smartphone with the app, and then for train motors you just have the one, but there's also various other sized motors that they've released. So I've only used the basic setup as well as some lights, but I've found that it works really well with both the controller and the app. The app does have some other nice gimmicks, like you can make a few sounds with it, but you can only control one train through the app, whereas the controller, you can control the lights as well for a train, because it's on the separate channel, and there's 5 different coloured channels. However, you can also do some much more interesting things with it. I know Matt has at least been working on a tram that, using a colour sensor, is able to automatically do a 3-point turn, which I think is very interesting. He might be willing to talk a bit more about that. And I don't think there's much else to it. There's only 2 ports on the hub, which means you can't really do things with more than 2 motors, which is quite restrictive.
Okay, thanks for that summary. So we're over to Luke now, who's covering power functions.
I think it's safe to say that a lot of people who power models, not necessarily just trains, but just power in general, are very familiar with the power function setup. It's a little bit more encumbering than the new power up system on the basis that it uses an infrared system and therefore an infrared receiver. You've got your battery box similar to the power up system, you have a motor, again similar in setup and display. You've also got to squeeze in your infrared receiver somewhere, and that's what makes the power function setup less desirable than other things that are still available. It's something that you can still get online. I'm not too sure about the prices. I've seen it go up and down. It's something I'm not too familiar with myself because I'm not someone who does a lot of powering, but then again, this is the only thing I would comfortably use. There's a load of motor selections where you have wheel motors, you got cylindrical motors, and this is something, again, you can play around with. You can get some large motors into some bigger models, and it's kind of amazing in a way where you can get an extra bits of power from everything in the power function setup you could squeeze into something somewhat compact. But at the same time, having to squeeze it all in, you're going to have to try and sacrifice some of the details because of the infrared receiver, because of all the other things that you have to put together to make that package. One thing that I would say is still the best thing about power functions is all the other accessories that comes with it, like all those motor sizes, like things like lights. That's the first thing that comes off to the top of my head. There's probably 1 or 2 other things, but so far, at least when it comes to power functions versus power up, things like lights, you don't have that yet, so that's something that still seems desirable to other builders. And personally, when it comes to using power functions themselves, Trains has so many different models that uses power functions. I've not seen anything else, not just for trains, but again, generically, when you think other people who are making their models and they've got them powered, how many other people have made models like that are powered? Trains is probably the most dominant thing when it comes to the function system specifically, but I'm hoping that when it comes to future products, the power up line can absolutely tank it and just take over.
I think Tim had a good comment there, which was actually there are, I think, third-party adapters for using powered-up components on power functions and power functions components on powered-up as well.
Yeah.
So they are sort of interchangeable if you use third-party adapters for whatever reason.
Actually, I can interject here. Lego actually does have an official solution to powered-up versus power functions. And I can't remember which system it is, but there is actually an infrared sender. So what you could actually do is use the one system to feed a power functions infrared receiver, and it'll actually respond to the commands that way. Although why you'd do that is because it's so expensive is a bit beyond me.
Yeah, it's built into the new powered up app.
Yep, I guess so. Yeah, that might be true. I'm not a fan of that app. Okay, finally we have Andrew, who's going to talk about 9-volt, his favourite power system.
Absolutely. Yes, so before power functions came along, most Lego train fans at the time were using the 9-volt system. This came about in 1991, and it was the first one to introduce trains that used power provided through the running rails direct from a mains transformer. Even though the older 12-volt system had used electric like power rails in between the running rails, this one was the first one to use the kind of all-in-one track pieces, which were injection molded with metal plates kind of crimped on top. And then it used this standard motor unit, which took power from the rails directly into the motor. And it also had a power output using the standard 9-volt connector for powering lights and things. So, of course, the main advantage of this over some of the more modern systems like powered up or powered functions is that you're using mains power. So you don't have to worry about batteries or indeed having to fit things like receivers inside your loco. Probably the main disadvantage of it now is that it was discontinued, unfortunately, in 2006, so 15 years ago now, which means that, of course, it's very hard to get now in terms of price of second-hand bits on the internet, that sort of thing. Another disadvantage, of course, is because it works in the way of a conventional model train, you can't control more than one train on the same track. Basically, you just control the power to the track, and whatever train on it at the time moves accordingly.
Thank you, Andrew. So we did cover this in the last podcast, but I think to make it self-contained, we can briefly discuss this. So favourite power system, official power system, and why, and we can open that out to anybody in the podcast, really. I think mine, I liked power functions best, probably, even though some of the equipment, getting the IR receiver in and the battery box in smaller locos didn't really, that's not a nice task, but having something that's self-powered, so it's actually a locomotive that can power itself, is quite nice, and you can do that with 9-volt. But it was down to how you set your tracks up and where your power points were. And yeah, as Henry has just said, in 9-volt, with 9-volt, you could cause a short circuit if you had sort of a reverse loop that wasn't properly insulated. I did warn you in the leaflets about that. But anyway, we can open up to members. I'm going to pick on Dan first. So Dan, what is your favourite official power system for Lego trains?
Power functions, purely because I have no 9-volt, and I don't like powered up.
9-volt. If you didn't get track at the time, it is really expensive now. All of these AFOLs have bought it up. Many of our members included have bought it up in massive quantities. So it is quite pricey these days. Luke, I'm going to pick on you next. Favourite power system?
Oh, for me, it's a bit of a silly answer because I only have experience with one. Actually, that's not true. I have two. 9-volt and power functions are the only two I've used. And 9-volt was only for a short while when I was a kid, and now the only thing I've really stuck to was power functions. So, yeah, again, it's a bit of a cheap answer because that's the only thing I'm familiar with. But then again, seeing other things available so far, it's a bit intimidating having to go to something new. At the same time, I'm not someone who powers a lot of my models, so I'm someone who is also happy just to stick to the power functions because, again, I don't do a lot of powering. It's something I have plenty of, and I'll just stick to that.
Thank you. We'll go to Henry next, but can we just take a moment to appreciate how quiet it is without Miller? Okay, yep, Henry, you're up.
Okay, so my favourite is Powered Up, the most recent one, because I've only got that, power functions, and some old 4.5-volt batteries. The 4.5-volt, that is, of course, really old, so that's out of the question. And power functions, from discussions within LNUR, I'm pretty sure I've got some dodgy equipment that means it doesn't actually work properly. So it kind of is powered up by default.
Okay. Where do we get to? Matt.
I'm going to stick with the crowd and say power functions because, like most of our members, although I was around when 9-volt was around, I mean, I still remember 9-volt being available in Lego shops because the Lego store in the Bullring in Birmingham still had 9-volt when it originally launched before it closed. But pretty much all the stuff I do is power functions based, and power functions is the most flexible of systems in my mind, and it's always been available except for, as I said, the past couple of years, so I've got a good supply, and pretty much all aftermarket systems you can get use the power function style of connector. So although it is supposed to, the question was about your official system, it is technically speaking also the most official Lego system that's had most of the aftermarket systems developed for it.
Yep, I think that's a fair answer. Bill, we'll go to you next, although I'm pretty sure I already know the answer, but off you go.
To be honest, anything but power functions for me. Thinking of all the mocks that I've got and all the multitude of ways I've got them powered, I haven't got a single base powered up in any of them. I just find the plug on top of the battery to be super restrictive and ugly. The receiver to be an extra pain in the backside to hide anywhere. The fact you have to leave a gap for the infrared
But at
receiver.
least you could stack at least with power functions, you can stack the inputs, and it does obviously drain the battery a lot quicker, but at least you could do that.
Yeah, but then it sticks out even further. The stuff I build, it just doesn't fit. 9-volt fits, and power up fits, but power function doesn't fit, and it's infrared, which is an awful way of controlling anything. The only power functions I use now is connected to an S-brick, which orders for later.
Enough. Okay, Andrew. I think I know the answer already, but
Yeah, we have kind of already covered it. That 9-volt is kind of my baby. I was just basically fortunate enough to grow up with it, so that's why I've been able to get a bunch of it before it went really expensive. Main advantages of it for me is that you don't have to worry about the batteries and receivers in the model, so it's a lot less restrictive in terms of fitting the system in to a particular locomotive. Having said that, you are quite restricted to that one design of motor bogie. So for things like steam engines, it's sometimes not ideal. And for that reason, I have started experimenting with like powered up and power functions. And I'd say powered up, the newest one, does appeal to me because of the fact you don't have to worry about the receiver and the fact that the plugs go in the side, as I think Will and Richard were just talking about. So yeah, mostly 9-volt, but I am willing to experiment.
Cool. We also have a new member, Tim, who has a contribution for us as well on his favourite standard LEGO power system.
Hello, yeah, I'm a bit on the fence between power functions and powered up. I really like the range that power functions had with obviously stackable system where you could put multiple outputs from the battery and things like that. But the one problem that I really had with it was the dodgy infrared receiver. That really frustrated me. Having like only a maximum of 2-meter distance and it hardly picking up when it gets like the slightest of blocks on the loco.
Yeah, it's very limited. I think the 08 design by Maseo that a lot of members have used to build a Gronk. It wouldn't be a podcast without mentioning Gronk, I guess. That design definitely suffers from it's based on the power function system, and the IR receiver is quite hidden in the cab, so you have to point the controller at a specific level to get it to work. Otherwise, it just runs away. Luckily, quite slowly because it's a Gronk.
Yeah, I'd really like to see
his layout doing that.
Yeah.
I'd really like to see how LEGO develops the powered up in the future. I feel like they've got a really solid system using Bluetooth.
I think powered up's problems are entirely down to the software, and if they could fix the software, it would be a really good system, because the actual hardware is fine. It's great. It's exactly what I wanted them to do to replace power functions. It's got a better way of receiving information. You're not beholden to a controller. I know there's a lot of controversy about some sets not coming with a controller, but you honestly don't need it anymore. You've got your phone. So I think it's right. It's just the app.
I'd rather not use my phone. That's my issue.
I use it for several third-party setups, and it's just easier than having 5 different controllers, which you always walk away with.
Yeah, that is true. I prefer the controllers because I want to take pretty pictures on my phone usually. Okay, yeah. We also have Levi has joined the podcast a little bit late, so we'll get a little tut for that. Levi, do you have a favourite standard LEGO power system before we get into custom power systems?
Well, I don't know. I think I'm going to have to go with power functions because I don't really have any experience with any of the others.
Same issue as Luke. Yeah.
And okay, granted the IR receiver isn't the greatest. I haven't found it too hard, other than maybe in my class 10 to put the receiver on show. And I've lied in bed before while shunting around like my bullied or something with the IR receiver in the tender, and that seems to work fine. So maybe it's just dodgy receivers all round. I just seem to be a bit lucky.
Yeah, I have quite a lot of receivers, maybe 10 between sets and things. So
I believe the version 1 was a lot worse than the version 2.
yeah,
and the only difference is there's like a 2 stamped somewhere on the receiver. The only external difference. But yeah, I believe a lot of the problems people have had with the actual receiving is down to which version receiver they've got.
Okay, we can move on to an overview of each custom power systems capabilities. So Will is going to talk us through Circuit Cube and the Studley trained tiny motor.
Yes, so I'll start in the order that I discovered them in. They both use virtually the same tiny little motor, and full disclosure, it's a very noisy tiny little motor. So if you're in a very quiet environment, you will hear these trains coming. But they're both excellent little power systems for small locomotives. I've got tiny little 040 Pug that's powered by the the Studley train's tiny motor, and it's not bad considering the size. It doesn't pull a massive amount, although that's partly because of the lack of grip on the wheels, but it's not bad. The Studley train setup consists of a 3D printed mount which you put the motor in, which is then plugged into a circuit board which has an IR receiver on it, which works with the Power Functions remote, and that then sits on a cradle wherever you want it in the locomotive. And it also has a battery that plugs in the other side of the circuit board. Its main issue is it's very much been developed by one man in his garage, and it's pretty good for something developed by one man in his garage, but it does have the side effect of not quite having that professional polish that you would expect from a Lego system. I mean, obviously the parts that connect it to the Lego are all 3D printed. Now, clutch power wise, I haven't had any complaint, but they're a little bit tight, but they're not bad. The main issue for me is the infrared receiver is literally just on top of the circuit board, and whilst it's got a pretty good range, I think it's better and more responsive than Power Functions was. It's difficult to give it line of sight without you being able to see the circuit board sticking out the locomotive. If anybody's seen the video I've done of my Pug powered by it, you can see it sat in the cab. Now, the guy who created it has designed a couple of locomotives with hair breadth gaps to hide, which it's hidden in, and he reckons that the receiver works that. I haven't tried it enough, but I do know that the receiver does have a very good range for infrared. The only other issue is there is no charge monitoring capability on the current version, although he's looking to upgrade that, which means if the battery goes below a certain charge, it will ruin the battery. So you have to be very wary of how charged it is. So that brings us on to the Circuit Cubes, which, as I say, uses the same motor, but is created by a big multinational company and is designed specifically for STEM education, which I believe is an American term for basic science education. And it consists, the sets that I use is the Circuit Cube Bluetooth upgrade set, and it consists of one Bluetooth battery box, a selection of wires, 2 motors in clear cases, and enough parts to create a very rudimentary but fun little tank. First off, if you do buy it, build the tank. It is an excellent amount of fun. It's a bit like the Batmobile, but smaller and less ridiculous somehow. But the main thing is it's quite an affordable and reliable system. I've charged it for the last ages on it. I've got it on 2 or 3 locomotives, and I've yet to have to charge any of them since I installed it, which is not quite fair because I haven't done any shows yet, but I have left some of them running around for a while, and they still switch back on the next time I use them. It's an excellent little system, although it does have exactly the same problem as Powered Up, in that it has an app which seems to be very heavily inspired by Powered Up that isn't great. There's no way of controlling 2 ports with the same control, which is very frustrating, although you can daisy chain the motors, which is more than you can do with Powered Up. But then that makes it difficult as well, because the motors are 2x4 by 1 2/3, I think it is, something like that. And there's only one plug socket on each motor that is on the 2 side of the motor. The rest of it is all on the 4 side, which means if you've got it in between your frames, you then have to make some really clunky structural decisions using panels and whatnot in order to fit your wires around. And I've done that on one of my locos, hidden it with the wheels, and it works okay. But it's a lot of effort to get 2 motors powered on the same loco. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's very easy to use. So I highly recommend the Bluetooth one. The Tiny Trains one is good for what it is, but it's more expensive. But what it is, its biggest selling point for me is you can fit it in a smaller locomotive than you can the circuit cubes stuff. And the circuit cube stuff can fit the Terrier, but if you do anything smaller than a Terrier, you probably want the Tiny Trains motor.
Thank you, Will. And next up, Matt is going to speak about FX Brick and Matzo Bricks for us.
Okay, so FX Bricks, for those who have already put 2 and 2 together, is also made by the same people who are currently trying to bring 9-volt track back into the foray for Lego fans. And the FX Brick is their first attempt to update the market. And the FX Brick has 2 power functions outputs and is controllable by a Bluetooth and infrared. The infrared is actually using the standard Lego controller system, so you can use this controller in exactly the same way as you would for a power functions equipped locomotive or train. And the system itself is based around the control system for all the power function controllers. So obviously, whether it's the dial or the emergency stop button or that sort of thing, changes what functions you can do. And the best thing I think about the FX Brick is that the fact it's got a separate light breakout board. So although you only have 2 motor outputs effectively, you have 8 light functions across 16 LEDs. So what that means is that can give you quite a nice variety of lighting functions. So in like locomotives, for example, if you were going to do a multiple unit, you could equip the loco with a PFX brick and then use that to light up all the interior lights as well as motorising it. If you're doing a steam locomotive, that's good for doing individual lights in all the head codes, or for doing firebox flicker and all that sort of stuff. And all that technology in terms of having the flicker effects and all that sort of stuff, it's actually built into the brick already. You just need to tell it that light function is a flicker. You can tell it the intensity of the flicker. You can alter the timing. You can do all sorts of stuff, because it's designed not only for trains but also for, say, static things like police cars that have their sirens and flashers on and all that sort of stuff. And speaking of sirens, the PFX brick also is equipped for sound, using a 2-pin sound output, and they do medium and large speakers. And the PFX brick, you can actually load sound profiles on it. So PFX themselves have a generic steam and a generic diesel sound profile, and there has been talks about making more specific or more varied ones. So maybe they'd do one for a bit more of a larger loco, like an express loco, and then maybe a smaller one for maybe a little tank engine and things like that. And then obviously varying it up with diesel, so you've not got the same sort of sound effects for every single model you do. But obviously all that extra functionality does come at a bit of a input in terms of the price. And the other thing that Carter's mentioned has been Matzo Bricks. Now, Matzo Bricks, from what I can see, is not purchasable in terms of it's something you can go onto a website and buy. It's more sort of a foray into using Arduinos or that sort of sort of programmable controllers and how he's gone about it. So I'm not necessarily sure whether that's a sort of product you can buy off a shelf, but it is certainly something that, if you're interested in automation and that sort of side of things, is very much something you might want to look into, especially with how he's gone about sort of the diagrams and schematics about it for various layouts.
Thank you, Matt. I think next up we have Dan from TechBrick. So TechBrick is a UK distributor of lots of cool Lego train stuff and nerdy stuff like that. So Bricks and S-Brick and Circuit Cube and all sorts of things like that. So, Dan, would you like to tell us about S-Brick and BuWizz?
Yeah, S-Brick is a Bluetooth receiver and speed controller that's operationable with power functions. So it's app-driven, so Android or Apple, and also through things like Chromebook, but also talks through Arduino and all those sorts of weird techie things that I really don't know much about. But basically will run all of the power functions motors with an adapter. So from the PV products, adapter will run the powered up motors as well. So you can cross them over. You can use the standard Lego battery, or you can create batteries using 9-volt PP3s or RC type LiPos with PF connectors on the end to power it. It'll take 11.1 volts, so it'll allow you to run a couple of train motors on a bigger battery and a bit more power. The biggest thing with S-Brick is the updated app. The app itself will now control Powered Up, Control Plus, BuWizz, and also the S-Brick and the S-Brick Lite, which is its sort of new standalone light control kit with some basic coding in, so you can do some automation and sequences within it. That's about it with the S-Brick. I think it's a universal replacement for the infrared receiver on power functions.
Thanks, Dan. I think that was a nice overview. Finally, we have Andrew, who's going to talk us through DCC, which is a technology usually associated with traditional model railways.
Just before we cover that, are we going to cover BuWizz from TechBrick?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yep,
Obviously.
I had not spotted.
Yeah,
I had not spotted BuWizz actually.
BuWizz is a slightly more high-end version of the powered-up unit. The original BuWizz was a 4-channel power functions, LiPo, Bluetooth controlled all-in-one, which gave you 3 speed settings: normal, fast, and ludicrous. Ludicrous being that it was chucking 11.1 volts straight out at about 750 milliamps, I think. It's app controlled in the same way as S-Brick. With a bit of tinkering around and using another app, you can control it like S-Brick through PS3 controller. So you don't have to rely upon a phone. You can stick your phone in your pocket or hide it and then just control it through games controller. BuWizz are just about to bring out their BuWizz 3, which has 4 powered up ports and 2 power functions ports, a slightly larger capacity battery. I now know who make them, so this is quite interesting. So I've been talking to some of the guys behind the actual production of them. And also they're looking at there will be another version of this made by somebody else without the BuWizz logo. But it's basically a 4-channel, 6-channel Bluetooth driven integrated powered up replacement. Quite costly, about 140 quid.
Ooh, yeah, that's a bit eye-watering. You could make a teak carriage for that. If Lewis was here, he'd totally get that. Okay, Andrew, yeah, on with DCC then, please.
Yeah, so this is a very niche thing that some people have experimented with. Those who are interested in Lego trains will probably also be aware of the wider conventional model train hobby, and hence be somewhat familiar with what DCC is. For those who don't, DCC stands for Digital Command Control. And essentially, rather than controlling trains on a powered track just by varying the voltage, and whatever train that happens to be on the track moves. You send a constant voltage along the track, and then you have to fit the train with a special chip, and then you send a digital signal on top of the power through the track, and the chip within the engine reads that signal and then uses that to control the movement. You can also use it to add further functions like light and sound to the model. And of course, it means that you can control more than one train on the same track. In terms of Lego trains, there's no kind of plug and play system for just making it work with Lego. So it basically involves having to modify a 9-volt train motor to fit the special chip inside it. I've seen a couple of people do this. Some of you might be familiar with Carl Greatrix's work, aka Bricktrix, and he's had a go at doing some stuff with DCC. He built this quite nice old DMU, which had working sound and light, I think, as well as being able to control it like independently of other stuff on the same track. I think he was using a conventional model railway controller, basically something you can buy from the likes of Hornby or Gauge Master, that sort of thing. They tend to be on the pricey side, but generally work quite well. In terms of doing the Lego stuff, as I said, you have to modify the 9-volt motor, because at the moment, when you get the motor motor itself within the units is connected directly to the pickups. And for DCC to work, you have to disconnect the pickups from the motor and fit the chip in between. And back in the early 2000s, there were a few websites that kind of gave you tips about how to do this. I actually had to go myself about 10, 15 years ago. It is a bit tricky to kind of get inside the motor and then fit all the bits in. I had reasonable success with it, but generally it's not the easiest thing to do, and the more conventional Lego train powered systems are much easier to use. So if it's something that you probably just want to have a go at because you fancy the challenge more than anything else. On top of that, then, someone, if you remember the original Mindstorm system that used the yellow RCX brick, someone designed some custom firmware for that, which basically outputted the same as a DCC controller, which meant that other than the chip you put in the locomotive, you have a completely Lego-built system that's running DCC. That was pretty cool. So that's basically what I had a go at doing. You use that old infrared controller that looked a bit like a TV remote from the Mindstorm system to control the trains. And I managed to get this train moving around the track and the lights working separately. So yeah, it's something that's if the 9-volt system's coming back with the new FX track stuff, then it might be something that people might give a try at doing again. But who knows?
Maybe a good option. I remember using the original Mindstorm's RCX as a probably young teenager or preteen to get a train moving backwards and forwards on a track and controlling it that way, which was obviously quite hit and miss. But yeah, that's what you have available, I suppose. So one thing I don't think we've really covered very well so far is the costs of these different systems. So we've mentioned that I think one system Dan mentioned was particularly expensive, about £140, was it?
Yeah, BuWizz is about 140. Yep.
That is pricey. So, Will, do you want to tell us roughly what a circuit cube would cost, at least in the UK, and then people can translate to?
Yeah, since Dan started selling them, they're about £30.
Yeah, tax and import duty rubbish. Yeah,
which is for bang for your buck, pretty spectacular, I have to say.
Not bad, yeah.
Before Dan started doing them, they were almost exactly the same price after import as getting the full micro trains kit, which was I think it was about 70 quid.
That's the Studley train. £70 the Studley trains.
Yeah.
Motor, right. Okay. And do you want to tell us about pricing for S-Brick and BuWizz? Although you've obviously mentioned one, but
yeah, S-Brick 55 for an S-Brick, S-Brick plus 65.
Thank you. Any idea on FX bricks, Matt?
That's something I was actually just about to look into, but obviously with their store being shut, I don't think it's actually something that the pricing is actually available for. I do know when I bought mine, it was reasonably priced. So I think it was more than the S brick, but it was cheaper than the BuWizz. But obviously, your price is dependent on functionality.
I think it's worth at this point mentioning also shipping. So I know Alan Tech Brick obviously stock quite a lot of them. I think the FX Track and FX Bricks specifically didn't mention the UK in one of their latest videos. Is there actually a shipping solution to the UK for that?
Not yet.
We've been
sorry,
Hello?
a lot of people spoke at one point at the same point there, and I didn't. I was trying to give them space to speak, and then everybody shut up at the same time. Okay, we can move on from that. I was
about to say, if you're discussing price, it's worth also mentioning that BuWizz actually also includes the battery. So as a
okay. So actually,
yeah, I was about to say, so technically, although things like circuit cubes and Studley trains also have a battery or include the battery, the BuWizz is also the only standard-sized system that actually interacts with power functions connections that actually includes a battery. So in that respect, it's your battery and your controller all in one. So the only other thing you'd need is a motor or two.
Yeah, it's an 11.1 volt LiPo. So yeah, you've got, and it's got variable outputs.
Okay. I think that the first we're going to sort of open it up to a more group type discussion now. I think, but the most obvious place to go is when is it acceptable to use a third party system over a Lego one? And I think firstly I would say if it's your model, you can do what you want with it. But I would try and be Lego purist to a point, and then there is definitely a tipping point where I'd start using third-party stuff. For example, Track, if it doesn't exist in Lego. I think the circuit cube motors that Will was talking about are quite a smart idea, and Lego are never going to produce something like that, at least for quite a while. They might be quieter when they produce them, but I'm not willing to wait that long. So
I doubt it. The motor itself is the noise, and it's the smallest commercially available motor, so they'd have to use the same motors.
So, let's open this up to members. When would you feel it's acceptable? Because, people have their own models and they can do what they want with them, but when would you feel comfortable using a third-party part for power?
Yeah, I think you've got it spot on there. It's people's models, so it's down to them to decide. But me personally, with my inexperience with powering stuff, it's weird because, again, with that inexperience, I've got some weird models. Like my trains in particular, they're tender engines. They're quite heavy as well, so I'm going to need more than one powering unit to be able to move them. So I power my rolling stock and have it all pushed that way. But I've got 4 powered coaches in order to get the whole thing moving and even get up to speed. In a perfect world, something that's somewhat compact and has some power is what I would go for. I think if it's going to be something that's third party, that's not going to be a concern of mine. The only thing I would worry about is trying to figure out how to make it work. If it's Lego or third party, personally, I'm not concerned, just so long as it delivers with what I want.
Fair enough. What about Henry?
So I've got some plans to use circuit cubes in the future for some smaller builds, like probably a Terrier, and then probably some other small shunting builds that you can't really fit powered up or power functions in. And then some of my larger builds I'm planning may use powered up or power functions, or because they're a few years away, I'll see whatever else is on the market that's affordable and reasonably space efficient. Because I wanted to,
I think that's the big thing, isn't it? The space efficiency.
Models, as opposed to designing the models to fit the power system.
True. Okay, we'll go for Will next, I think.
I I mean, I've always very much been. I'll use the motor that works for the locomotive I'm designing. I've done a lot of small locomotives, either as my own designs or as contributor designs recently. And Lego simply don't provide you the options you need to power them. So,
No.
Third party all the way. In all honesty, I think the cheapest motor for the application is the best, which, quickly enough, is a third party one for smaller locos. Other than that,
I think a part of the smallest motor thing is obviously Lego is apparently a children's toy and definitely not for serious Lego railway builders. So they obviously have particularly European limitations on toy safety, which is why there was one cable that was 1 meter long or 2 meters long in one of the earlier Technic space shuttles, and that hasn't appeared in a set again. And I think part of the reason for that is even though the set was probably 12 plus or 14 plus or whatever it might have been, there's too much of a risk. So that's part of the reason why another AFOL frustration is the power functions cables are really short.
I mean, I can't speak for the cables because the cables that come with the circuit cubes are tiny. Although there are externally because they use a very standard educational plug, you can probably find longer ones for it. But I think the problem with Lego is Lego are a building block company that provide motor solutions. When you get some like circuit cube, which fits all the safety rules, it's designed for kids, it's a mass-produced toy. But circuit cubes are a company that produces electronic devices that happen to use building blocks.
And I'm pretty sure they outsource the electronic stuff a bit like they outsource the base plates.
It's Tenka are the company that make it, but that's what Tenka does. Circuit Cubes is just a brand that Tenka sells it under.
Yeah, sorry, I was referring more to Lego there. That
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I think the power components, I'm pretty sure they outsource, because, like you say, they're very good at designing stuff and producing blocks, which is good because that keeps us in the hobby. But there may be not so. If there were a scientific toy company, maybe they'd be better at the motor side of things, or there'd be more variation anyway. Because I actually think power functions as a toy, okay, they have some frustrating characteristics as an AFOL, but as a toy, the powered up system is pretty good. The power function system was pretty good. 9-volt system was pretty good as a toy. Maybe as AFOLs, we're trying to stretch the capabilities of that a bit, which is why the third-party systems are a good idea. Okay.
Part of the fun of Lego, isn't it? Turning a kid's toy into an art form.
Yeah. The limitations in some way are part of the. Maybe fun is the wrong word, but part of the challenge of the hobby. I think I quite like that. So we were going on. We were talking about when is it acceptable? When would you personally use a third-party system? I don't think we got through to Andrew yet, had we?
Yeah. So I think people have already said that. Yeah, basically, if it's your model, then do whatever you want with it. So the reason I'd probably use a third-party system is if I was constrained on space. So the circuit cubes certainly look like a good option for smaller locomotives, for example. For things like the S-Brick, BuWizz, and FX Brick, I'm probably going to stick to the official stuff because I'm happy to use that. And kind of going back to your point about the challenge of sticking within the official parts, so the purist aspect of it. In terms of where I think it's acceptable to use, I think most exhibitions I've been to don't really have a problem with people using third-party control systems, mostly because they're not really obvious to the public, that sort of thing. So in terms of that, I don't think I can't think of many situations where it's not acceptable.
Yeah, I think Lego Trains is. Are we maybe special enough to be allowed? If you went to a Lego show and had Playmobil on it, or you had Meccano or something, you might told off. But I think if you've got custom tracks, maybe a lot of show organisers don't realise. But I think they're acceptable as long as it's something Lego doesn't produce themselves. and there's a good reason for needing it. So custom power systems, yeah, especially in smaller locos, like a lot of people have mentioned, is a good reason. Okay, who have I missed on this? People might have to shout up because we deviated for a bit, and now I'm. Oh, Levi, I guess you can speak. Go on then.
Hello. Well, I mean, I think I'm a bit biased because obviously I've just sort of, I'm got some FX brick stuff coming very soon to, make some sound and whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it's just whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, I think I look more at third-party alternatives now than I do at Lego, full stop. Just because I prefer the power function system, and there seems to be more compatibility with that third party than there is with Lego.
Yeah, that's fair. Matt, have you been on this question? I can't remember. Sorry.
No. The one thing I'd actually bring up when you're talking about control systems is limitations. So it's something we've sidestepped so far, but power functions is incredibly limited in that you only have a maximum of 8 controls. What I mean by that is that the receiver itself is limited to 4 channels, and each channel actually has 2 outputs. So you're technically limited to 8 functions. So what I mean by that is you could technically have 8 locos, all with one motor, or multiple motors if you'd stack them, and it wasn't going to blow the receiver. So you could technically have 8 locos, but that'd be your limit, because each one is limited to the power functions output. So obviously in that sense, if you're on your own, that's probably very fine. But when you start talking about going to do exhibitions, for example, 8 is really restrictive, especially across multiple builders, because then you're starting to talk about colour codes and who's got what channel. And if you've got conflicting channels, is one accessible, so you can actually change the channel and that sort of stuff. Moving on to aftermarket systems, they're all, I think with the exception of 1 or 2, are pretty much all Bluetooth controlled. So your channels are, in effect, limitless. And obviously, I think it's pertinent to point out that the aftermarket systems went to Bluetooth before Lego did, precisely for that reason. Now, obviously, there's a stipulation with that, is that Lego as a toy company has got to go for all the legislative permissions and testing and all this sort of stuff with the legislative side to make sure they can actually sell it on shops, whereas as an aftermarket system such as BuWizz or S-Brick or that sort of stuff is going to be purchased by adults for adults generally, so there's a lot less restrictions in that sense. But the real thing for me in terms of aftermarket systems is first of all affordability, because again, if you're using power functions, some of you or some of our audience may have certain stock of it, but if you're going to start from scratch, obviously you're going to buy what's available. And the other thing is that if you're going to do exhibitions, you want something that's reliable, and having something like an S-Brick or PFX brick, which is a bit more reliable, or a BuWizz if you want to go for that luxury and can afford it. You've obviously got that wide range of channels, you've got all that expandability, and if you're going to do the aftermarket power function side, you're also a lot less restricted in terms of how things function than you do for Powered Up, because Powered Up, outside of the app, will only actually respond as a train system if you actually use the train motor, because of the way it's coded, because obviously it picks up sensors versus motors and that sort of thing, which is why it's a 6 ribbon cable or 6 channel cable instead of 4. So obviously you've got power, you got the input sensor or the function type, and then obviously you've got the function control. So from that respect, you'd quite clearly better off with an aftermarket system if you go into an exhibition, because A, you're not limited by line of sight with power functions if you're using the IR receiver, and then B, obviously you've got that thing where you're not actually conflicting with everybody else because yours has got a unique channel.
Yeah, I think that's a big selling point, isn't it? Okay, I think we can move on a little bit, and we've covered the next question a bit already. And the question is, what are the benefits of a third-party system, and I think we've discussed size. So Lego things are quite chunky because it's a toy and they don't want kids swallowing it. So sizing, you can power smaller locomotives than you used to be able to. Flexibility, so you can do a bit more than the Lego system allows you to do in terms of lighting. So was it the S-Brick that had the built-in flicker function for lighting and things like that?
Yes,
really cool.
It's got the
and then, sorry, Matt.
I was about to say it's because it's. I think yes. I think the PFX brick is also the most output intensive in terms of aftermarket systems because it's got 2 standard PF outputs and then 8 channel outputs over 8 function outputs over 16 outputs in total.
Yeah, so you get the flexibility with it. Does anyone want to chip in with the other reasons they've used custom power systems? I think we've probably covered most of them.
Yeah, I'll just say something. It's not really third party. It's more of a mod, but something that I've seen that I quite like to keep it more pure as Lego is modding the battery box to use a 9-volt battery instead of Lego's system. An example of this I've seen is from Dunkster Bricks. People might know him. He's used it
he's
in
on YouTube, isn't he?
Yeah, he's used it in his 08, I think. It's very simple because the battery box just stands alone as itself with the power functions compared to the powered up, and it obviously reduces the size quite drastically.
I think that's a good use, and I know Will's got an 08 with is it a C battery unit or something?
Yes, it's one of my members gave me a modified cable for it. Uses an S-brick and a C battery, although due to my own poor design, it's not super brilliant. There's no way of switching it off and on again, which the S-brick just sits there eating all the battery. So it might be from a circuit cube at some point.
Might be a solution in chat for you because actually it's a bit of a discussion in chat whether Tim meant just a loose 9-volt battery or one of the old style 4x8x2 battery boxes, 9-volt battery boxes. I have a couple of somewhere. I've not seen them for years, and I probably left the battery in, so they're probably very corroded by now.
Ooh.
Yep. Or ruined.
Yeah, my little Barclay runs with a 9-volt PP3 with a modified power functions to 9-volt cable.
So Tim says his was a loose.
It's quite a nice little system, but depending on what you're using for control, you do need to bear in mind whether you need to switch it off or on or not, off and on or not. My Gronka, I literally have to dismantle it and unplug the battery every time I'm not using it, which is not ideal.
Tim's logo was with a loose battery, is what he says. So I did get the right end of the stick for once. So I think moving the podcast along. I'm sure we're near the hour mark by now, or well over that probably. So I think it'd be nice to discuss what other options there are with the custom power systems. So the circuit cube, I think it's the circuit cube, came as a tank control sort of system. So what else could you use for a Lego railway layout? I think I'd be very tempted to buy one of the circuit cubes and try and get some sort of bus or maybe a larger vehicle driving around the layout if we had a loop of road, which we don't on any current layout, but it might happen.
The idea of having motorized road vehicles and that sort of thing is really cool. So yeah, if we can start using the circuit cubes, for that sort of thing, that would be really good.
For road vehicles, I'd be very tempted to experiment with is it Fuller or someone like that does a system for HO00 road vehicles that basically they follow a metal
induction loop.
Yeah, they follow a loop underneath the road.
Fuller car system is what Andrew says. Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, I think in some ways, if it's just a loop, you could just power the back wheels and have the front wheels flexible and just have it following a magnet or something with a rack of metal underneath. Andrew says that's the Faller system, which is used on model railways, which is basically the same thing. It's sort of a a metal wire path that you lay into resin or whatever underneath the road surface you want them to run on.
Well, you could do what
And,
Russians done, and the kind of literal opposite of what we did with the player, and just use Scale Electric's tracking motors. That'll be quite fun.
True, Brick Alley member. Yeah, a Brick Alley member did put Speed Champions models on top of Scale Electric's bodies. It's really good fun for a show. It's really cool. I think the Scale Electric roads look a bit pants though.
One thing me and Andrew have discussed is using a Circuit Cube's Bluetooth controller and possibly buying a couple of packs until the motors become available separately, and actually using all three outputs and having a little crane tank. So obviously you'd have one output for
nice.
backwards, and then the other two for rotating the crane, and then another one for raising and lowering the hook.
It was a great video of a model railway show before pandemic. I have a feeling it was Glasgow or up in Scotland, but it may not have been. And they had I think it was 00 gauge. It had a tamper going down the track, but as it was travelling very slowly, and the machinery underneath the tamper was working as it would work on the prototype. So something like that, it gives you more options than just stop and go, doesn't it? If you have more control over the outputs of power, you can do more imaginative stuff.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think the sort of tank cranes look really nice. There's a couple in chat at the moment.
Yeah, the tank crane's an option, or even just a crane mounted somewhere on the layout, like in a dock scenario. You could just have a little crane that's pivoting backwards and forwards, hook going up and down. It would just add a lot of interest to an otherwise static layout for visitors, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to do a container sidings or something with a crane. And I know, is it Terry Acuna who's in a lot of the Lego Railway Facebook groups?
Yeah.
He's built something along those lines, or at least designed it. I don't know whether he's built it. I think the Australians have a bit of a container port. Is that Alexander McCook or be another builder? They've definitely got a couple of modules that are the Melbourne Lego Train Club. I think have got a couple of modules that are container port stuff, and they have a lot of containers. It's quite impressive. Okay, we can move on again. Oh, this was worth mentioning, and there's probably not a great point in the podcast to get this, but Levi, it's maybe not custom train control in one way, but you've been working on a system for controlling a manual system for controlling points from, particularly for layout at a show, for controlling points at the front of the layout from behind the layout. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this isn't for all types of points. It is mainly for Tricks Bricks points, as they have their sort of the thing that actually shifts the rail has plates on top, as opposed to the Lego system, which has a molded switch, which you can't really, you need some sort of lift arm to flick it over, which is more complicated. But you can get a 1x4 plate with Technic teeth on the top, which you just sort of slap on to the point mechanism, and then using a combination of universal joints, a gear, and lots of axles, you can basically control a point from a distance away, all just through mechanical rotation. I found the few limitations so far with the system being Technic axles have a tendency to flex along the rotational force. You have to, the further away you go, the further you have to rotate the axle for it to change. And the other thing being that if you go too far or you put too much force in, the entire box you build around the point just pops off, because the force just isn't there to hold it to the point itself, which is a problem more on the traction, or not the traction, but how snug Tricks Bricks studs fit onto Lego stuff. But I've been looking more closely into using a circuit cube to act as just a short pulse nearer the point. Although I don't own a circuit cube yet, so I haven't been able to test that out and make it much better.
I'm sure we can arrange to get you one sent to test things.
Yeah, we can probably work that out. Matt in chat has mentioned, is it worth mentioning pneumatics for turnout and point control? It most definitely is. And Stuart Jones, who we've had as a guest on here from the Swansea and Halterworth Lego Railway layout, is a big user of that. He's got points and signals controlled by different Lego mechanisms. There's some really ingenious stuff there. The other application I actually thought of, and I don't know how we've missed this, probably because Jamie isn't here. Narrow gauge trains. Jamie's got some. I know Jamie's quite a purist builder, and he likes using only Lego things, and he's got some really great narrow gauge trains, powered by. I think it's power functions he uses usually, isn't it? And so he has, but it'll have a loco which is driven by a motor in one carriage, which is powered by a battery box in another carriage. So it's not a self-powered loco, and I wonder whether the circuit cubes would be small enough to try and power something like that. I think that would be quite nice. Yep, Tim says Isaac Smith Movies on YouTube, who's a member, uses an arm that is hidden behind his layout to control his signals. Yeah, so it is possible to do it. Got quite a nice little video there. Okay, moving on to sort of the end of the podcast, because I think we're running maybe possibly on time, but almost certainly over. Why are there any reasons people wouldn't use a custom Lego train power system? And I think one that I'd flagged up in my notes is for Will, who's been doing instructions. Are there sometimes you don't want to use custom power parts, although you've said you're starting to use the circuit cubes in instructions?
Yeah, it's I have resisted the urge to use any custom parts. I started using wheels in some of the more recent locomotives because there was no other option, which has kind of opened the floodgates, I'm afraid. But it's an awkward fact that Lego refused to let you put anything that isn't Lego on Bricklink, which makes ordering third-party things very annoying. But I've started to realise that that's just, you just have to suck it up and deal with it. I have a feeling that it's better to introduce prospective mockers to what they have to deal with when they design their own things, and it is try and coddle them and pretend you don't have to.
I think that's fair. So the final couple of questions, unless anyone has another reason as to why they wouldn't maybe use a custom power system.
I think not going for custom stuff or anything third party, it's just a general sense of unfamiliarity. You look at something that has the Lego name on it, you're immediately aware, okay, this is something made by Lego, therefore it's a bit more simpler. If you go to someone like Circuit Cubes, you have to go to a different website, you have to learn something potentially completely new, and even that can be very off-putting, despite how simple it could be.
That's
because it doesn't have, just because it doesn't have the Lego logo. I'm not someone who is like that, but even though I know those options exist, I've purposely not gone towards them because I thought, I'm not familiar with them, so it's been a bit of a turn off.
No, I think that's a fair comment. I think the Lego train hobby, there are people who are very purist about it, and they want everything to be Lego. But I sort of understand that, because if you buy something that is Lego, you know it's going to fit in the system, so it's going to connect to other things. Presumably going to be pretty easy to set up and run, although looking at powered up, perhaps not always. I think that's a good people. There's a comment from Tim about gatekeepers bullying people to be 100% Lego. I guess there's some of those in the community. There's people who very purist builders who only like pure Lego builds, and we certainly have that a lot in the Brick Train Awards. We do allow custom rods, custom wheels, because otherwise we'd be left with some pretty crappy models, really. I think custom wheels and rods can make a model sort of 10 times better than the Lego only version. I'm going to move on from that very quickly unless anybody has anything else to say.
I think another thing with the unfamiliarity is also whether you can actually it in the first place, whether it ships to your country. So us being in the UK, I think FX Brick stuff still isn't available for us yet, is it not?
No. It's a bit annoying. We have tried to contact them and ask if they've got a shipping system, and I think Dan has too, to try and get.
Yeah, we've
Get
been
some
asking. We've been asking for quite some while to FX Bricks to see if they'd be interested in letting us bring them in and shipping it out through the UK.
You must really like paperwork.
Absolutely
Man.
no reply. I hate paperwork. We've had to.
You must love it deep down because you keep volunteering to do all these things, including helping get some of the Brick Train Award prizes were stuck in Poland.
They
Bricks.
came in under the radar. They did. Yeah.
Okay, so last couple of questions, I think. So I'm going to start with the best thing you can motorize. So not just powering a locomotive, but on a Lego railway. What else could we be doing with this that's going to make layout more interesting for? Presumably, it's one at an exhibition, so layout more interesting for families visiting or things like that, and also more entertaining for us as Lego train fans. What could you do? I'm going to pick Will first, because I'm sure he's got some ideas.
Level crossings, signals, points.
Yeah, I think that's a good start. Quite like I know the Aussie guys have I think it uses magnets on a motor to pull. Is it a model boat or something around the river?
Yeah.
There's a kid on the banks with a remote control, isn't there? I guess the smaller the motor, I think that's a really big selling point. Although noise at exhibitions from the motor, I suppose, isn't so important, is it?
Is it Trix Bricks who does their own level crossing system, which I imagine would be quieter than using a circuit cube, but is definitely a lot more expensive.
Yeah, Trix Bricks have a complete automation system.
It's heavily inspired by the 12-volt system, which I think is really cool. I also think it is way beyond my purchasing power right now.
Okay. Any last ideas before we shut the podcast down for the night? Oh, Henry. It's always Henry.
Yes. This is actually something I started working on a couple of years ago. Operate actual working hopper wagons for a layout. So you can fill them up, run around the layout to somewhere else, and then unload them without having to actually touch it yourself. Which I know, I can't remember the YouTube channel off the top of my head, but someone's done it with Arduino motors on YouTube.
I've not seen it in Lego, but I've seen somebody do it with a 009. I think it was a 009 layout where they had going back to the conversation about the moving vehicles. They had the trucks unload them onto a loading platform, and then a little lorry drive up and pick up the load, and then disappear off scene where presumably it drops them back on the trucks.
Oh, nice. I've definitely seen a couple of 00 gauge layouts doing it, but there's definitely one that does it in Lego on YouTube somewhere. I don't know the channel, but yeah, something like that. Except I was trying to do it without having any sort of motors in the wagons, because I started this a couple of years ago before I knew anything about circuit cubes or the Studley motors or anything small. But having learnt about those, I'm thinking when I get some circuit cube motors, I will probably try and see if I can fit it in, because that will make it so much easier to do it, and I think it will look so much better.
Thanks, Henry. A nice closing point. So, thank you for listening to the podcast about Lego custom power systems for trains. This is the LNUR line, episode 15, and we'll be back shortly with another topic. Thanks for listening. We're on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, everything basically. Just look for LNUR on whatever platform you're on, and we're probably there. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Good loop.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Grunk, 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 grunk.
Au revoir.
Someone had to do it because Miller isn't here.